Is something that we're asking about. From what we've seen for the last few days, they haven't really shown any signs of being an organised force, anything like an army, if you like, a ragtag bobtail army you would describe it as, and the experience level is pretty low. So, you know, I would find it very difficult to believe that a serious force is going to go up against Gaddafi's hardened forces in Sirte. But, you know, anything can happen here. There is a great deal of enthusiasm, a great will for a fight now, because the people here realise that, you know, in the beginning they thought Gaddafi would go peacefully. Then they thought the international community would push him out. Now it's swung back their way. They believe that it's in their hands and they will have to fight. So they are gearing themselves up for that, and the mood here is quite confident, very buoyant, but there's a note of apprehension because they know that Gaddafi still is a potent force, and also in the air. If he controls the skies, if there's no air exclusion zone, then it could be a big problem. We've seen what's happened in Iraq before. For example, the end of the first Gulf War, President George Bush Sr. incited the Kurds and the Shiites to rise up. Saddam was allowed to fly his helicopter gunships and he crushed that uprising. So that can be crushed by the air. So who controls the skies means who wins and who loses.
Tony, you're in the rebel-controlled east of the country. This heavy fighting we hear in the west, in AlJazeera. Do you know whether the rebels there who control Benghazi in the east are in touch with people who are fighting in the west of the country, such a long way away?
Yes, they're in touch. Communications are very sketchy. They're very intermittent here. Internet is largely down, and it's down to mobile phones. But the mobile phone service comes and goes on a daily basis. But there is ways of getting it, and people are still coming through. There are some kind of people, refugees, example, that have come out of Sirte. So there is possible to exchange information. But you know, whatever story you hear the counter side of the story. The government have taken this, they haven't taken it. The rebels have taken this, they haven't taken it. So you know, it's very confusing.
Tony, for the moment, many thanks indeed. Tony Bertley on the confusing situation at the moment in Libya. Tony is in the rebel-controlled city of Benghazi in the east. Now, the Obama administration is coming under increasing pressure to impose a no-fly zone over Libya, but so far it's ruled out getting involved in any military action. Earlier today, we spoke with Zbigniew Brzezinski, a former national security advisor to the Carter administration, who says that the U.S. should be playing a more strategic role.
We are not destined, nor should we be, to act as the sole policeman of the world, whether it is in our interest or it is not. I think we have to judge each case on its merits. But in this particular case, I do think that some greater but indirect involvement would send the right message and move events in Libya in the right direction. I think the deployment of ships right off the shores of Tripoli would in itself send an important message. If it was tied also to the possible unilateral evacuation of Westerners, it would send a stronger message. And all of that would be an indication to the very uncertain and divided Libyan military that it is not in their interest to be supporting Gaddafi.
From Libya, let's move eastwards to Egypt, where hundreds of protesters have clashed with police in the country's northern city of Alexandria. Several people were injured as they attempted to storm a building which houses the state security agency. Demonstrators say that officers inside were trying to destroy documents linked to human rights abuses during the rule of ousted President Hosni Mubarak. And in the capital, Cairo, Egypt's former interior minister has pleaded not guilty to charges of money laundering and profiteering. Habib El Adli was arrested last month and is also widely blamed for being behind brutal attacks by security forces on protesters during the recent uprising. Now, Somalia, and more than 50 African Union peacekeepers have been killed in fighting there in the past 2 weeks. The deaths come amid a major offensive against Islamist al-Shabaab fighters who control large parts of the country and the capital, Mogadishu. A large proportion of those killed are believed to be from Burundi, one of 2 countries which are providing the bulk of soldiers there. It's a large death toll for the African Union, which normally keeps such casualty figures firmly under wraps. In China, Premier Wen Jiabao has pledged to reduce inflation and corruption and to raise income levels. He told the annual National People's Congress in Beijing that the measures are necessary to maintain social stability. Al Jazeera's Melissa Chan reports now from Beijing.
It's a formal and serious affair, with officials from across the country, near and far, convening over the next 10 days. There's often a celebratory mood on the first day of Congress, with leaders looking back at the past year's economic accomplishments. But in the Great Hall of the People, China's premier used his opening speech as an opportunity for an honest assessment of what's going on in the country.
We are keenly aware that we still have a serious problem, and that our development is not yet balanced, coordinated, or sustainable.
The premier went on to discuss the threat of corruption, telling the people sitting before him that they, the officials, will be required to disclose their income, real estate, and investment details. He promised better social services to citizens.
We have not yet fundamentally solved a number of issues that the masses feel strongly about, namely the lack of high-quality educational and medical resources and their uneven distribution, increasing upward pressure on prices and exorbitant housing price increases.
Real estate is indeed a tremendous problem for most Chinese. And on Saturday came the enormous pledge from the podium to eventually provide low-income housing for 20% of the country's urban households.
Every year, Premier Wen Jiabao takes the opportunity on the opening day of the National People's Congress to remind the people the government cares. But this year, more than the past, there are greater assurances from the government to improve things such as healthcare and education. It's a more worried government. Melissa Chan, AlJazeera, Beijing.
This is Al Jazeera. In just a moment, we'll return to the battle for Libya, and we'll take a look at a different sort of fight, the one for food. Taking a look at how the uprising is leaving some Libyans without the very basic of supplies, the most basic of supplies. And we speak to the so-called hacktivists who are bringing down the websites of major corporations and governments.
Hello. Well, we saw some very heavy snow making its way across northern and central parts of Iran on Friday. That's continued to drift its way further eastwards across Turkmenistan into Afghanistan and just into the far north of India. Plenty of clouds showing up on our satellite picture. Quite a bit of snowfall to come here. I suspect it's unwelcome at this stage. It's been a very snowy winter. More very heavy snowfall to come just over the higher ground up towards Kashmir. Then come further south, not too much further south. Much of India fine and dry. Plenty of warm sunshine. Temperatures now creeping up into the mid-30s for many. For Sri Lanka, well, we could see one or two showers into the far south of the country, but for much of Sri Lanka, it will be fine and dry over the next couple of days. Colombo with temperatures hovering around 32 or 33 degrees. We have seen a fair amount of cloud too across central parts of the Arabian Peninsula. It's been rather overcast here in Qatar in recent days, and this cloud will gradually continue to just edge its way a little further south. There's a chance of a few spits and spots of rain on that, but essentially it should be fine and dry. Temperatures in Doha at around 25 Celsius. Now for southern Africa, well, it's South Africa. Here it is largely fine and dry, but the seasonal rains will continue through Madagascar, through Mozambique, into Zambia, with more very heavy rain to come for Angola.